Hey everyone, welcome to our session here. Should be a fun one. We're going to be talking about mastering the art of deal execution, and we have some revenue leader veterans here with Justin and Chris to dive in with some really good specific examples. But before we get into it, for some quick intros, I'm Ross, CEO and co-founder of Accord. Accord is basically a way for revenue leaders to enforce their standards of what execution excellence looks for them. So we'll talk about some examples of that today. But yeah, Chris, I'll pass it off to you to introduce yourself.
Great. Hey, everybody. I'm Chris Culkin. I'm the head of revenue at Census. We're a platform that allows companies to seamlessly activate data from their data warehouse into downstream business destinations like Salesforce or ad platforms. Previously ran revenue at a Series A fintech and ran global sales at Circle CI before that. And excited to chat with y'all. Justin.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Justin Bullock here, VP of Sales at Envoy. Been here almost 6 years. Envoy is a workplace platform. We help humans enter and interact with physical workplaces, and we provide those businesses with really timely data about how their space is being utilized and how their return to office efforts are going. Prior to that, I was at Periscope Data, which is now Sisense, and before that, New Relic. And before that, all the way back starting in 2008, I was at SuccessFactors, which is one of the early SaaS companies before we used the term SaaS. So really happy to be here, really excited to talk about all of these topics.
Awesome. Great. Well, let's dive right in and maybe a quick overview of kind of the topics before we get into some specific on the field examples. There's kind of three key parts around deal execution and execution excellence we'll be digging into. The first being like general strategic approaches. What are some key strategies that you've used in the past that you've found it helpful to navigate and win some complex deals? Second, when challenges do come up, what are some of those examples and how did you overcome them, or maybe didn't and learn from it? And then kind of third, evolving some tactics. How have they changed with market dynamics and tech advancements? How do you approach things maybe differently today in 2024 than you did the last 5 or 10 years? So with that, we'll get into the first one, which I'm looking forward to most, which is key strategies for navigating and winning big or complex deals. And Chris, I'll pass it off to you. When you think about big deals, what's kind of top of mind that you kind of advocate for your teams?
Sure. So I've been a part of a variety of types of companies where the deal could start with a PLG motion, or it could start with, a tops-down sales motion. So I can certainly talk to kind of the differences there. But I think in either scenario, I'm a big fan of data collection frameworks like Medic or MEDPIC, or also Spiced, which is very similar methodology. I don't really consider those to be sales methodologies, but ultimately the data collection frameworks help really the entire team ensure that we're getting the data points that we need for a complex deal. Also just from a strategy standpoint, whether you're PLG or your tops down sales, both sides have to engage the other side. So it's not enough to just engage an executive on a deal anymore. Like realistically, executives are always going to look for buy-in from the teams that are actually utilizing the tool. So even if they're the signer, you can't do a deal unilaterally with them. On the flip side, I think what's definitely changed is, and I experienced this firsthand at Circle CI, it used to be that a developer would be able to swipe a credit card, maybe even you experienced this at Stripe, where a developer would be able to swipe a credit card and get started with a product, and then that product could grow. But now you have much more oversight from the CFO and from executives, and so you have to be bringing in senior level contacts to totally sponsor everything from a deal strategy standpoint. So, I'm a big fan of, I call it kind of the sandwich sale. Like I think actually usually your buyer's somewhere in the middle. But often they're the hardest person to get in touch with. And so I think if you're going to start a deal, actually starting top or starting bottom is the best way, but ultimately you need to involve all three stakeholders to get a deal done. There's a lot more I could talk about, but Justin, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Chris. for us, there's been something that's been really top of mind, which is not just how do we get deals closed and how do we get these strategic deals across the line, but are we sure as we begin to pursue those opportunities that these are the right deals? Early days at Envoy, we had really incredible net revenue retention. And, as of a couple of years ago, when the economy turned a bit, and I've heard this term that I can't get out of my head that people have used called the sassacre, where a lot of businesses really started to scrutinize, what is a need to have and what is a nice to have. I know in tech, we tend to oversubscribe perhaps to a lot of different software tools, and there's a lot of value in that. But for us, we've also started to focus on being way more relentless about our ICP, because getting those deals closed and across the line is really just part of the equation. If we can't keep them, if we can't retain those accounts, they can be wildly disruptive for your business. And so I know we're talking about how to get these deals closed, but first and foremost, we're focusing a lot more these days on our actual ICP, what target verticals are really growing, and most importantly, which verticals, which buyers are seeing our solution as an absolute must-have. And so, that's a lens that I did not look through as much even just a couple of years ago. So that's been a real big focus for us. In addition to that, we've got a new CRO on board, really excited about George, and he is having us double down and refocus on MedPick. We've all used variations of MedPick or other discovery frameworks and methodologies, and this has been refreshing for the sales team. Sometimes rigor rigor is always extremely important, and we're doing a lot to focus on that these days as well.
Totally. Yeah. Love your point around not just about getting deals done, but who's going to be a healthy customer long-term. And definitely was not the case for a long time, because you didn't need to be. Like, why would you, especially if you're on the sales side and bring on revenue, if they're not going to churn and they're just going to have you as part of your stack. Obviously you want to grow the business, but like you said, people are kind of ruthless about their spend today, and you don't just get a deal across the line and onboard them and spend all that money on marketing for them to churn. So that's a really good point. When I think about, maybe this will be a simplified version of Justin and Chris's, but I like to boil deals down to by champion. I think especially in this market, the only way you're getting a deal done is if someone really goes to bat for you. This is not like Chris said, this is not some end user who's excited about the product. This is not some executive who isn't going to be involved in really rolling this out. This needs to be someone who has a seat at the table, has some power, and understand how it's going to move the needle for their for them across a lot of different ways. So I think about this in kind of three different, kind of levels, which is one, like, why would they trust you in the first place? You need to show up with someone who's an expert. Obviously if you're coming in and you're an AE, you're not going to have the breadth and depth of the experience of potentially a VP or a senior director. But your thing and your market probably better than they do, right? Like that specific, anyone on your team, Justin, I'm sure even if they're like a couple of years out of school, is probably going to know your space better than anyone they're going to sell to. So you have that, and how do you show up that way and be an expert? I always, going to trade my reps on that. The second is, what's leading them to spend time outside of their day-to-day? People are slammed, especially if they're decision maker, champion level people. They have a lot of stuff going on. Why would they invest the time with you outside of their day-to-day for this potential partnership? Really understanding how they're moving their career forward. And the third, how are you spending time making them look great in front of their leaders, in front of their peers, in front of their direct reports? So those are the kind of the three things I obsess over when it comes to complex deals. And when you need that champion to be pushing things forward, introducing you to people internally, getting stuff done. Why are they spending time with me? Why are they even spending time on this initiative in the first place? And then how do I make them look really, really freaking good? Because people at the end of the day are the people buying on the side. It's not just the business. And that's kind of the lens that I always try to think about and get my team to rally around.
Yeah. It's an interesting point. Like, I think you said a couple things about champion that are really important. Like you said that they have power. I think that dynamic has also definitely changed.
Well, I'm not talking about an influencer or someone who likes your thing. I'm talking about a true champion, right, who can like actually go to bat and talk to the leaders.
But I think that it used to be someone you would have been like, okay, this person is a champion, and like you would judge based off of their title, and then like, okay, yeah, they're that level of seniority. I could see that, but sometimes that can be misleading. That person may or may not actually have the level of influence that even they think they might have. And that can take a lot of discovery and engagement with a variety of stakeholders within the company. The other same thing that you said that I double click on is the product expert component. Like, I talk a lot about how there's good time salespeople. I'm like, cool, you sold Snowflake from 2017 to 2021. Like, was that hard? And I see that and go, salespeople used to be able to say, like, great, how much do you want to buy? I'll send a contract during that time frame. And it's like, that's not really what sales is. And I think that being an expert in your product doesn't necessarily just mean that you understand its features extremely well. Like, I talk a lot about, I call it like fab selling. So basically features, advantages, and benefits. Like, you have to be able to communicate all of those things to that champion. Because if you're only talking about features, they might not connect the dots between ROI. And if you only talk about ROI, I'm sure both of you have met these salespeople that just talk about, like,
what keeps you up at night?
Yeah, right? Like, hey, we're going to solve your problem. And it's like, but how? Right? Then there's no credibility and there's no legitimacy to what you're saying. I think those are great points that you make about just the champion and being a product expert. I think those things are more important now than ever.
And I would even take it a step further is market. Like, I think about the best sellers and hearing them on calls. I'm like, the VP on the other end just wants to talk to them because they understand the problem space that they're working on, even outside of the features, even outside of the benefits. They're like, I'm working on this general problem. You're someone super well educated who's seen hundreds of other people in my shoes solve it. I'm just curious to hear, like, what do the other 5 people before you talk to me think about this? How did they try to solve the problem? Like, that's the stuff that I think separates, the consistent 120% plus quota reps from the rest. Is, are you someone that the other person just even, has kind of the professional respect for? And I think it goes beyond rapport building and, kind of having things in common. It's being valuable, kind of here to talk to. So.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And, I think it's more important than ever, Chris, I think you mentioned this, to also confirm that you have a champion, right? I don't care if you're SMB, mid-market, enterprise, named account, strategic seller, whatever. Your champion is not just the person that talks to you. Your champion isn't just the person who picks up the phone, who answers the email. You really have to confirm that this person is your champion, and you have to define what that means for your business. A rep that I managed handful of years ago, shout out Nicole, had a champion confirmed process. So it was like a very specific process about how I confirm I have a champion. And it was far more than this, but the key question was, as you're speaking to that individual, are you ready to recommend our solution as the top choice? Right. And the word ready is really important in that question. Are you ready? Because it gives them an out to say, I want to be, but maybe I'm not ready yet. And then you open the door to a really interesting conversation. I think one thing that's really kept me up at night, since we just used that phrase, a few months back, I saw someone post on LinkedIn, and it was a statistic that I have not forgotten about. I don't know where it came from. I don't even care if it's true, because I believe it's true. And it's buyers report that in 92% of sales calls, they learn nothing from the sales rep. That hit me like a ton of bricks. I've been thinking about it ever since. And it actually inspired me to go back to the Challenger sale, which at this point is over a decade old, I believe. And it talks about how can we teach, right? And so I'm thinking a lot these days about how can my reps teach to some degree in those, especially early parts of the sales cycle. Ross, you mentioned, does the sales rep understand my problem, and how are they helping others in the industry, or in my industry, others with this problem? And I think that that's absolutely necessary. But then to take it to the next level, to get to that sort of advisor level, you have to be able to challenge and teach a bit. And I know we've probably all read that book, but my favorite phrase as I reread it recently was, if your buyer says, yes, Ross, you get my problem, you understand it, that's only really like level 1. That's like a C. To get an A, it needs to be, you know what? You understand my problem, and I've never really thought about it that way, right? That's when you start to get into the money, so to speak.
Yeah, I love the phrase, the never thought about it that way. Like that's honestly almost how I try to encapsulate teaching challenger sales is just that phrase. Um, yeah, I also think your point about discovery, like I don't know, I haven't seen that stat, but I believe it. I cannot stand when I get on a discovery call with a vendor myself and they ask me a ton of questions and I'm like, I want to get value out of this call. Like what I make sure to my team is like, it's a two-way discovery. You are mutually deciding if this is a good fit. You're going to ask questions, but then what I tell them is come forward with an assertion and ask for confirmation, rejection, or alteration. Like it isn't just about asking a question. You have to have a viewpoint. If you don't have a viewpoint, it doesn't mean you're educated about your product, their problem, the solution, or have any idea about their business. And so you're showing that you're really not bringing value. Like, I think that's one of the core things that has changed, right? Like you can't go into that conversation, just ask them questions and be like, great, we're a good solution for you. Now let's schedule a demo with someone technical that can talk about this. Like that is a terrible sales motion and you'll always lose. And yeah, I'm a huge fan of Challenger as well. I mean, if you remember Challenger came up during the 2008 recession. And so, you know, not too dissimilar to where we are today.
Totally. I think it's a great place to kind of shift gears to some of the challenges maybe coming up in deals. But I think to kind of summarize the points that you guys are making, the word that came to mind was conviction. Like your team needs to have conviction around the problem that they're solving to be someone on the other side of the table instead of what I call order taking reps, which I think is kind of the opposite of what we're talking about. So awesome points, guys. So shifting gears, we're looking for a discussion around challenging deal scenarios you faced and, you know, either how you navigated it or how you wish you navigated it. Because obviously you got to learn from your mistakes and sales is a great game for that. But yeah, maybe Justin, if you want to kick this one off.
Yeah. And should we drop specific names or speak more in generalities?
I was going to use generalities because some people might know the people at the company I'm going to talk about, but totally up to you, depending on how recent maybe the deal was.
No worries. Yeah. You know, my favorite sales author is Todd Capone. He wrote a book, The Transparency Sale, and a few others. My favorite deals are when we're in a competitive deal with someone who does not have like an apples to apples offering. And in most companies, when you get deep enough, are not always apples to apples. But what I'm talking about is specifically in deals where, and this is coming up for me more today than ever, which is we have a variety of issues we're trying to solve on the customer side, but we only have a limited amount of budget to solve those issues, right? Which sometimes they're telling the truth, sometimes they're not. And many organizations are faced with, I have to choose between two solutions that actually solve a different set of problems. And there's concentric circles there, right? It's not wildly different. But more and more today, I'm finding that organizations are faced with, hey, I've got, let's say, 6 problems I'm trying to solve. One vendor solves 4 of the 6, the other vendor solves 4 of the 6, and there actually is some overlap and some difference. I find those deals to be incredibly exciting because that's where we can sit down with the customer, be extremely transparent about where we're strong, be really transparent about where we're strong in terms of what they're looking for, but also acknowledge that, you know, it's, if you're considering this competitor of ours, then we assume that these things are important and these are not our strengths. So let's have a really direct conversation about your prioritization of these issues. And if we can do that, that is also another way to get, you know, that advisor status with your buyer. But those are the most exciting ones that I've seen. And we've seen some like that recently where it's like, okay, we're going to actually rip out this vendor that you're using. And as part of that, sure, you're going to have a wonderful experience with Envoy, but you're also going to be losing some key functionality that we either don't do or that we don't do super well yet because it's newer in our platform. And so those are the most exciting wins to me, where the buyer is actually with you hand in hand going, we're choosing you because what you do is more important to us, knowing we're going to actually lose out on a couple of things. And I think for young in their career sales reps, that's a really uncomfortable way to sell, right? Admitting where you're weak. And yet, you know, shout out to the transparency sale. I think there's real power in that, because the biggest thing for me around that book in particular is that every single customer interaction is an opportunity to build or erode trust. And I think there's no better way, frankly, to build trust than to be really upfront about where you're strong, where you're differentiated, and where you're not. And then help the buyer make that an informed decision, because all the buyers just assume the sales reps are lying to them. They're saying they do everything. They're saying you got to choose us or you're going to completely fail if you choose the other vendor. And in reality, that's not typically true. So those are my favorite wins that are happening lately. And I feel like the economic environment is creating more of those opportunities where companies have a finite budget to solve a set of problems. And I think if you're honest with your prospect that like, hey, we can solve a lot of those, not all of them. So let's talk about what's really important is an approach I just love to take.
That's definitely the gold standard. Yeah. How do you even impact what those, hey, these are our top three, you can help with, number two, super well. And the way that you kind of teach them about some of the problem space puts that at the top. That's definitely gold standard. Chris, what about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, Justin, I was smiling because I'm not as familiar with the transparency sale, but if you all have seen the movie 8 Mile and B Rabbit's rap at the end of 8 Mile, he starts out by calling out all the things that the other rapper is going to talk shit about him about. And then the guy has nothing to say. I always tell my salespeople about this. It's one of my favorite sales things outside of Tommy Boy, which is obviously the classic. But basically the fact that like your competitor is going to call out all of the things that are wrong with your solution and your product. And so actually, if you can call it specifically where the gaps are and where you're potentially not going to be the right fit, you own that narrative. And then it's kind of like, okay, you're in control of that narrative and they're not in control. So I think that that's a huge component, something that a lot of people do struggle with. I will talk about a couple deals by name. So if I go way back in the day with an organization called Staples, this is back when everyone decided they were going to have a mobile app, including Staples. I remember the agency that they were working with recommended a competitor of ours. And that was a challenging deal scenario because ultimately they're paying this agency a lot of money to make decisions on mobile marketing. And then I'm a vendor selling an alternative solution and don't have their agency in my camp. And we ended up getting that deal done primarily because I had an extremely strong relationship with the champion. This is when I was an IC. And I ultimately said, well, why don't we go to the agency and talk to them together about the concerns that they have with us? And if we're not the right solution, then for sure go with that alternative. The thing that I tried to do there and what I would recommend to other people in that situation, first of all, try to get ahead of the third parties that are going to impact your deal, right? There's going to be technology partners almost always that your solution is going to rely on or integrate with. And if you don't play well, you could be in trouble. Or if they don't like you or if they like your competitor, you could be in trouble. So get ahead of it. The other thing is don't throw them under the bus for making that decision or for pushing it. That's not going to help you. It's not going to help your long-term relationship with them, and they're going to keep recommending your competitor. So I'd say that was a deal that I won, but also one that I learned from. One of the other things that I think we're running into today that I ran into working with Facebook's PyTorch project, if you're familiar with that project. They worked with one of my previous companies, and the contract was getting to be such a scale that it was really kind of more of a build versus buy decision where build started to make a little bit more sense. And so I think if you're doing a really big enterprise complex deal with like a Facebook or a Unilever or a P&G, at some point they're like, well, you're charging me millions of dollars. I could hire some people and it would be actually more cost effective. And we ended up retaining them as a customer and having to downsize the contract. My advice there is anticipate that that's going to happen. Don't just get high on the dollars that you're getting and expect that to live forever. And then also look for ways to proactively bring more value to justify the dollars that they're spending. If you're not always giving more value per dollar to your customer, you're going to run into issues with churn, with downgrade, and obviously loss to competitors. So again, a deal that had a decent result, but I think that if you're doing enterprise, it's going to be something you run into when you start to talk about those 7 and 8 figure contracts.
Yeah, great call outs, especially on we can get so excited about the deal getting bigger and bigger. We start to stop thinking about the alternatives, right? Because they made the decision and, probably had one set of alternatives and it grows. And yeah, it's a great call out, Chris.
Yeah, I think there's a version of that too, Chris. I think that's a great call out where there's these moments in time where we get engaged early with a super fast growing company. And generally, in my experience, those companies are not super organized because they're going through just hyper growth. And I've seen sales reps get really just fall in love with like these, for example, like full price, no discount orders that are just rolling in. And there's, if you're a solution like Envoy where you can, there's a lot of expansion motion, maybe a small land with several expand deals after that. You got to really start to look at, to your point, Chris, the overall spend of the account. And especially if you're working with multiple champions, like who may not be knowing that their other champions at other offices or other regions are purchasing as well. It's not that they're making overlapping purchases. It's just that they're purchasing at a high rate with a lot of frequency. Mm-hmm. And you start to get the sense, or you should get the sense that like, does anyone know at this very fast growing company that we're starting to love, this customer of ours, like, is there someone over there that knows how much they're spending in total, with our business? Because that's always a ticking time bomb, right? And the reps they fall in love with like this full price order. Oh, another full price order. Oh, look, another one 2 months from now. And it's like, no, you got to sit down and look at the overall value of the solution, the overall spend of the account, and try to get out ahead of some of those things. As counterintuitive as that seems, and again, your sales reps looking at you like, are you crazy? You're an hour ago, you're breathing down my neck about my number, and now you're telling me to like, come up with a more strategic way to price this customer, which is potentially less revenue for us. But you have to look at it that way. And those aren't happening as frequently these days in this economy, but it's still, the concept still makes sense, right? Like if you have a solution where a lot of different regions and buyers are utilizing your solution, you've got to find a way to get someone that understands that on the customer side at a high level and have that value discussion.
Yeah, I had a very aggro conversation with Uber in 2014 or 2015 about exactly that, where they'd signed up and were like, they were Uber in 2014. And then all of a sudden they were paying us several $100,000 a month. And then we're like, what the hell? So that was a fun negotiation. And definitely one I wish I'd gotten more ahead of.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, we had a similar situation with Juul. I don't know if you remember how fast Juul was growing there for a bit.
Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned that, Justin, as an example, because the one I was going to bring up was a mix of kind of the market dynamics right now where you're getting a lot of new stakeholders, either people leaving or decision-making being higher in the organization. So maybe you're getting the deal done originally at a certain level and now it's elevated and you're missing kind of key stakeholders, but kind of both things happened here. Both, it was a super high growth, one of our early customers, super high growth, had a massive land and expand motion. We were loving these, every quarter we'd, be hitting our number massively based on this one company, nailing it and growing. And then, a few years later, it's like, oh, wow, like they're a sizable customer. And I don't think the people at like the senior VP level, like even know what their managers and directors are doing with us. And like, we've had a lot of success. But if I were to sell this deal in the first place, I'd be like, wow, this is a huge risk. These people don't even know about us. So we probably couldn't even get this deal done in the first place with the stakeholders that we have. And that's exactly what happened. Surprise, surprise. It went to a different level of stakeholder. They didn't have a dollar of us budgeted at this level. They didn't even know about us. And they brought in this whole new system, like all new leadership team on RevOps. And that was fun. I ended up like, really leaning into the story from the last couple of years and the value, but it was like a net new deal that we had to get done like before budgets were cut off. And I think it kind of goes back to a lot of stuff that we talked about at the beginning and just like, the fundamentals of the deals, and things can shift really quickly. So that was interesting for me because I was always on the new business side of things, and I held on to accounts for a year, but like multi-years, things can change. So that was a big learning for me. It's a big save. All right, shifting gears to the last 10 minutes or so, we're going to talk about how your approach is and maybe some of your best practices that might have been true, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, might not be true in this year, and maybe some technology that you brought in that's going to change the game for how you run your team. So maybe Chris, I'll kick this one off to you to start.
Sure. Lots has changed. We've gone through some interesting changes, obviously, with COVID, like that massively changed everything. And then the economy shifting. I hadn't heard of the SaaSacre, but that's a good little buzzword for me to bring home. So I don't want to start talking about AI, but I'll start talking about AI. Like ultimately, every company now, I shouldn't say every company, but 80% of companies have something about AI on their website. And so a lot of SaaS companies that you might look at are claiming AI capabilities. This came from like machine learning, which used to be programmatic, which realistically is just like a more automated way of doing things. I think though, if you are not constantly considering what aspects of your sales cycle can and should be automated, that's a problem. You have to be thinking about that. So one of the things that's immediately changing is I think that the entry level BDR or SDR, that job is going away. That job is going to change to the entry level hires will be back to inside sales reps. So dealing with your smallest accounts, doing full cycle sales, that's the job. That's how I'm structuring my team. The job that will figure out how to prospect and engage with new customers will actually be a more senior operational job that will then inform all of your sellers of how to do effective outbound with data. So platforms like CloseFactor or Clay, like these platforms help automate that process. But having an army of SDRs is not the thing. Beyond that, I think you're going to see the kind of growth of the full cycle seller. You're also going to see teams be much, much smaller. Ultimately for me, I look at how many deals can one salesperson realistically do, and that should be how you define your team expansion and growth. I also think that you'll go back to seeing the challenger profiles being much more effective. And so I think a lot of companies are seeing this, but the days of kind of everyone being at like 85% to goal, like if that ever existed, I don't know that that's going to continue to happen. The other change that I've made to my team is the CSM title is gone. I have account managers. So account manager is back. So kind of went account manager, CSM, I'm back to account manager. And I realistically think it's part of what we discussed. Renewals are not this default thing that just happened. Like you have to treat expansion and renewal like it is a net new sale. And so the type of profiles that are going to be successful there are people that are leaning into quotas. They're good at negotiation. They're leaning into tough conversations. Mm-hmm. That is certainly changed. I guess the last thing, like Ross, you talked about this at the very beginning, and I obviously double clicked on it a bit. Like you're going to have a team sale, and you have to understand your product extremely well. If you can't do a demo of your own product, you're not going to add enough value anymore. I think we're going to see a lot more blending between the sales engineer and account executive role in the future, just to ultimately make things more efficient. But also because people don't want to have a conversation where 92% of the time they don't get value, right, Justin? Like that's just a waste of time. And I think that all of these changes are really good. They're painful, but they are really good for the industry. Those are a few of the changes that I'm seeing happen. And obviously, I think more will happen over the coming years as the economy does whatever it's going to do.
Yeah, and I know everyone's heard this, but I found that really interesting, Chris, and I totally agree. I think there's also dangers with some of the blending that you mentioned. So, for example, and this is an oversimplified example, but the blending of, say, an AE and SE, for example, can lead to really product-focused sellers. And I think in the early days at Envoy, we built our team that way. The leader that was in place, my manager at the time, was really sort of anti anything that felt like cookie cutter broy, Silicon Valley sales. And I'll just go ahead and say that and own that phrase. But early on, what that created here was a lot of reps that were really comfortable demoing, really comfortable diving deep into the product. And we soon realized that you can over-index on that as well and forget how to sell. And so I think it's really important for that reason, and for what we talked about earlier in terms of retention and targeting the right accounts, it has to be outcome-based selling still. And so the challenge with the trend that I would agree with Chris that's happening is, as you get more technical, not to lose, the selling and the focus on delivering business outcomes. When you talk about renewal, Ross, I think you just said this, or Chris, renewals and expansion is like a new business sale. And when I hear that, what that means to me is we actually have to validate and revalidate the outcomes that we're chasing. Now, when that's poorly done, or when it feels too robotic, or when it feels, Chris, like you were saying, when you're on a sales call and you're being interrogated, I actually try to teach my reps a bit of like a safety valve. If you've asked too many questions, or if you're not asking it in a way that's really interactive, or if the prospect starts to feel like you're a robot that just has 50 questions to ask, ultimately you'll get kind of called out for that. Maybe your prospect's just having a bad day. What I like to remind the reps as a safety valve, if you get that pushback in discovery, is, listen, we're in this for the long haul. We're in this to be partners with you. When I transfer you over to our customer success team, which we are still calling them CSMs at this point, our whole team, everyone, even our support engineer, needs to know what outcomes you're chasing as a business, so that we can deliver on that. Our business, and frankly, SaaS in general, one of the reasons I love this industry is it depends on happy, renewing customers to fuel your business and to fuel your growth. You essentially have to earn that business every single year, unless you're signing multi-year agreements, which are also working more of these days. And so, yeah, that's all really important. And I think with the blending of those skills, we have to also make sure we don't lose the important selling skills. In terms of AI, we're probably a little earlier in adopting some of that than what Chris explained. We do see in the market that a lot of our competitors all of a sudden have AI in their product. It's like, wow, how did that happen? And it makes you wonder how real it is. And I think we know that in many cases it's not. We are not going to be one of those companies in terms of what we say we can do to our customers. However, in the go-to-market motions, I think AI has been incredibly useful, even for these early kind of use cases. So I know we're talking about big deals, but I have a sales manager on our SMB team here at Envoy who, as soon as we find really specific use cases for the product, we're going straight to ChatGPT and saying, give me 8 competitors of this organization, and we're going to go out to those competitors with this same message, right? And those are like really small kind of mini playbooks that have been working well. And then the last thing I'll say on this is, I remember my last role as an AE. It was back in 2013, and I was at New Relic, and we were selling to 2 or 3 specific personas. The hardcore developer, the IT manager, and like the DevOps manager. And I had this little cheat sheet on my desk that was printed out and on actual paper, laminated, I believe, and it just had a couple key bullet points. Topics, messaging, positioning to remember when I'm talking to the different personas. And as silly as that sounds, it was one of the more helpful pieces of collateral just to keep top of mind, what is top of mind for these different personas. I find personally, tools like ChatGPT and using AI can be really helpful for that, right? For example, I've got a new title that I'm not really familiar with on this call that's maybe not our core persona. Tell me about what this title cares about, right? How would the solutions I offer benefit a person with this title? These things are like one-off kind of seemingly small ways to utilize AI, but they're unbelievably helpful. give me some common phrases that this person uses in this industry, right? Those things are now at your fingertips. And if you're not utilizing them, and of course, I think we're all using it to rewrite a proposal or, make this email to my prospect who's stalling sound less aggressive or perhaps sound more aggressive. So, we're in early stages of adopting some of those things, but even those mini use cases or mini playbook examples have been exciting and really helpful.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely some good early use cases of AI in sales that I've seen as well. But when I think about that, it's almost on the opposite of like, as so much automation has come up in the sales industry, I think it's been both helpful for me as a seller and now as managing my team to actually stand out. I think because there's so much noise, and maybe this is like an overly optimistic way of looking at it, it's actually easier to stand out because everything ends up sounding the same. The bar for all of those output, like, I'm a CEO of a Series A backed company. I get, man, you know how many messages I get a day. I will literally respond to every decent one, and I'm responding to maybe one a month. Like that's like the bar that I'm seeing out there. I'm talking to my team. I'm like, I have no doubt if you have a good custom opener and you have a good cadence, like you're going to get responded to because everything else is shit out there. So that's kind of how I've thought about maybe this, maybe AI is going to transform that. I think we're yet to see that at scale and in the market yet, but I've thought about a lot of technology. I think if you're focused on excellence and you're focused on going and really spend the time to understand your customers, understand the value that you provide, stand out in the market, teach someone something, there's so much opportunity to thrive as a seller in this market.
Yeah. I mean, automation is totally a double-edged sword, right? Like when everyone is doing it, then that's why, I don't know about you guys, but I never answer my phone anymore because I get 40, 50 calls a day because the dialers are so good. But I can never answer my phone. I actually think the cool way to look at AI is actually at taking us back to sales fundamentals and like relationships, connections, referrals, having like good differentiated messaging. That is we are back to the point in which good salesship is actually getting results, which I love that. Like versus just, hey, I've got a really good grasp of how to use outreach. Like that shouldn't be how a salesperson makes it or not. And I don't think that it is anymore. I think that's a good.
Totally. Maybe that's a good way to wrap things up, since I know both of you guys got to jump on some other calls. That, we're talking about deal execution and all these great strategies. I think there has been this kind of new golden age that we're coming out of, I think, of the last 12, 18 months of like doing what the A players have always done, is still closing deals. And unfortunately, I think we got too used to things that, hey, this isn't working anymore. Like, did it make sense that it was working in the first place? Like, should we have been selling these people? Does it make sense that these people had budget to make these business decisions? Like, do we actually have the impact that we wanted because they made it? So I think it's been really fun to see people kind of sharpen their swords. And the fact that that a lot of AEs were moving to a world where they couldn't actually demo the product they were selling for like relatively unsophisticated software I think was maybe not the best thing. So yeah, excited for what the future's in store this year.
For sure. Appreciate it, Ross.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time, guys. This was awesome.
A lot of fun.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in, everyone. And hopefully you learned a few tips and tricks from Justin and Chris here. And happy selling. Take it easy, guys.
Thanks, team.